Hello, JL. I'm Dr. Lambert. Hello, doctor. I came as fast as I could. My art director broke the bad news. How is he? I've been working closely with Dr. Blinn and Dr. Fong, and this situation is not looking good at all. Paging Dr. Lambert to the psych ward. Paging Dr. Lambert to the psych ward. It's patient Ray again. What was that about? It's that damn Ray again. His girl Maya left him for a guy named Arnold. Never been the same since. Lost his mind, ended up in the psych ward, and now he just goes by Mental Ray. Getting back to him and looking at his vitals, we have lamina faces, non-manifold geometry, tris, n-gons, octagons, topologons. It's a complete, utter mess. What about UVs? They are automap. Man, this is worse than I thought. It might be time to just let go and start over. I can't, Doc. He has too much history, and I spent too much time with him. We have to save him. Is there anything you can do? Well, there's one last thing we can try. It's a long shot, and I'm not making any promises. What's that, doctor? Emergency retopology. What's going on, you 3D modeling beast? This is JL Musey, and welcome to my Maya Retopology tutorial for beginners. And in this tutorial, I'll be showing you step by step how I retopologize a character's head within Maya. I chose to do a creature's head versus a human, and I chose that for a reason. And I think that this character has some slightly different forms. It does have similarities to a humanoid character, but it has different variances that will better get your head around how to retopologize not just a human head, but any character that is thrown your way. So why do we retopologize in the first place? Many years back, packages like 3D Studio Max and Maya were really the only option for creating a character, and those packages mainly relied on edge flow for you to be able to create your character, right? So you had to have some sense of edge flow to be able to build those shapes. Fast forward to today, we have packages like ZBrush where you can completely sculpt a character, or even scan data that really topology is not a must when creating a character. But there's always a price to pay, right? Because these meshes, whether you have a ZBrush sculpt or scan data, if you're looking to create a production mesh, you're gonna need good topology, right? And without proper topology, this character that you're creating won't be able to be deformed, animated, rigged, or even UVs laid out to it. So if you're starting your mesh in a package like ZBrush, or you're using scan data, then retopology is a workflow or a technique that you should probably be aware of or knowledgeable in. So I imported my three meshes here, the head, the teeth, the eyes, as a OBJ, imported it from ZBrush. One thing you'll notice is that this scale is relatively small to the grid, and that's something I try to avoid. So in Maya, usually I like to pretty much scale my things around the volume of this grid, give or take. That's because really small scales will affect your tolerances and other settings that, are just not ideal when working with Maya. So ideally you want to work in Maya relative to the grid. Same thing as something comes in ginormous, you probably want to scale it down a bit. But in this case, we want to scale up and work with a relative volume to this grid. But on the flip side, I'll actually want this scale from ZBrush to be preserved, just in case that I want to export my mesh back and have it snap exactly to the mesh that was within ZBrush. Maybe I want to project some details. Maybe I want to do further sculpting, and I want everything to line up. So in this case, what I did is I grouped all my objects. I set a keyframe on all the transforms, and then on a second frame, or frame number 2, I just scaled up and then I keyframed these parameters, and you'll see that the scale's quite a bit larger. and the translation in the Y, now I'm working pretty much over the ground plane, right? So now what this gives me the option to do is work on a relatively larger scale. Whatever mesh that my retopologize mesh, I could always drag it into the scale group. It will inherit the scaling from this group, and then I could just snap it back to the original scale that it came from ZBrush and export it back in there, and I should have no scale issues. So let's go ahead and begin. So I'm going to go back to frame 2. I'll hit F to frame on my mesh. And before we dive into the nitty gritty of the actual retopology within Maya, I'm going to go ahead and show you this edge flow guide. So this character was done more of a traditional approach, just basically box modeled within Maya. And we do have a topology or a edge flow guide for this. This is a traditional humanoid character. I actually did this in a earlier videos, and if you actually want to check out how this was built, I'll throw it here on a YouTube card. But the reason I'm showing you this is because when you first start 3D modeling, especially characters, some of these patterns might seem a little bit confusing. You might not understand the rhyme and reason, but there is a rhyme and reason. And that's really just, these are optimized for deformations, right? So things like the eyes, these are things that are going to be open and closing, and you want that resolution to be there once these things are being pushed and stretched, right? Same thing with the mouth. You see that we'll have a radial setup here, and we also have kind of this radial corner for the nostril. And even though this character is pretty different as far as the proportions, once we start the retopology process, you'll actually see that. So the corner of this mouth is actually going to resemble the corner of his mouth. The edge flow around the eyes is going to resemble this. And we'll also see the corner of this nose here, along with this radial loop here, pretty much sectioning off the topology within the ear. So let's go ahead and begin the retopology process. And what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to go to the modeling standard workspace. By default, that's going to show the modeling toolkit on the right hand side, and we will be using the modeling toolkit quite a bit here. So from this point, the first thing that I'll do is let's just hide this edge flow guide. We're going to select the head. This is pretty much what we'll be working with. And we have a couple options here to the snap, but here we have make live. We want to make this a live surface. That way, whatever topology we'll build on top will automatically snap to this volume right here. And one thing you'll notice here within the modeling toolkit is that its transform constraint is set to the live surface, which is this head, which is pretty much what we want. So we'll mainly be working in the quad draw for this retopology Maya tutorial. So I'll select this, and one of the things you'll notice, we'll have the keyboard mouse shortcuts here. I will call these out as I'm doing them, but this is just a nice little reference to have of all the hotkeys available to you once you start retopology. So retopology is pretty much going to be the process of me drawing the proper topology on this pretty much very dense mesh that has no topology at all. And like I said earlier, the important areas are going to be the eye radials, the mouth radials, and the nose right here, and also pretty much the isolation of the ear. So that's going to be the main ones, as well as some of the neck muscles here. That's going to have some nice edge flow that we're going to create. So what I like to do, and what I see a lot of beginners actually make the mistake of, is when they start retopology, they start creating these very little small squares, right? So, they start retopology at this very, very small level. And eventually what happens is this, instead of being maybe an hour retopology, it becomes a 3, 4, 5, 6 hour retopology, because you're drawing these little, polygons by hand, and, it could just be very, very time consuming. So what I like to do with my retopology process is do it in passes. So I'll do a first pass that is pretty much a large pass with the main edge flow, established. And then I go in and start building the secondary shapes of the model, right? And really get in there. And one of the things you'll notice, once you establish just the larger shapes, It's just a matter of adding subdivisions, and a lot of that extra work is actually done just via these transform controls and just adding more resolution to your cleaned up mesh, right? So let's go ahead and just delete this here. We're going to go here to quad draw, and the first thing you'll notice is that we have a crosshair. This crosshair will allow us to place verts on our mesh, and then if we hold down shift, it's going to allow us to basically build a polygon between those verts. And you'll notice that as we're sliding, this transform constraint here is constraining our movements to this live surface. Now, we have a couple options. One of them is to add edge loops, and you'll notice that as we add a edge loop, if we hold down control, it's going to let us add that edge loop up, and you see that it's going to push, and really just as long as we add topology, that new topology is going to constrain to this underneath surface, live surface. All right, so if we added this and we want to delete it, we hold down control and shift, and that's going to allow us to delete edges and faces as well. Now, if we wanted to add a edge loop right in the middle, just like in quad draw, you can hold down control, middle mouse click, and that new edge loop mathematically is going to be right down perfectly in the middle of that new polygon. So from here, we also have the option of extruding these faces. We're not just limited to drawing all these points and just connecting them. We could actually extrude from these edges. So how we extrude from an edge is we hold down tab, we left click to extrude one edge, and we will hold down tab and middle mouse click to extrude a edge loop. All right. So we definitely have a couple options of how we build out our topology. The other thing I want to talk about is if we hold down shift, we could actually relax. And this is probably going to be more noticeable if I add a lot more topology. But you see that it's going to try its best to respect the volume, but spread these vertices around via this brush type relax operation. Another cool thing about quad draw is if we do control shift and right click, we can get to the multi-cut tool here. Alternatively, we could just switch it by clicking here. And now we can go in and actually cut into our mesh using pretty much multi-cut functionality. If you hold down tab, you could actually almost paint quad strips. So just by holding down tab and left clicking, you'll see that we are drawing pretty much these strips and they will follow my mouse. So that could be handy. If you need to change the size of the polygon, you can just hold down tab and middle mouse click, and you can drag up or down and, relatively make smaller or larger polygons. So let's go ahead and begin with our first pass. I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. I'm going to begin the first pass here, starting out with the eyes. So I'll go to quad draw, and I'll start at this corner here and just draw these 4 verts. Hold down shift in between to establish or create a polygon in between. And just going to move my way rather quickly. And just work this initial loop. That's pretty much going to be the eyelids for the character. Next thing that we're going to work in is the corner of that mouth. And just like the corner of the eye, it's going to have a similar radial corner here. So we'll start here. And it's pretty evident, this shape. So I'll just click my verts and start doing pretty much that initial radial loop. So I'm going to work my way around here. I'm going to add one break here, so holding on control, middle mouse clicking, and just space that out. And usually corners do require more topology. So another thing that I tend to do when retopologizing is I'll hold down tab, left click, and I'll go ahead and draw a large strip here and do that, and then I can go and subdivide this a couple times. So one thing that we want to be thinking about is these structures here. Let me do the bottom one because they're actually a little bit more prominent. So I'll hold down tab, left click, I'll shoot all the way over here. One thing you notice is that we kind of have these structures here, these that support these big teeth that this character has. So right now we don't want to start doing a lot of crazy stuff as far as topology. We still want to relatively keep this light. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to plan ahead, and I want to go ahead and basically just block this out with a single polygon. And then once the first pass is done, once this is pretty much isolated, we can go here and start, adding some nice radial topology and really just build this structure with some nice edge flow. But for now, what I'm doing is just encompassing this whole structure with a single polygon, right? So what I need to do is just start approximating with split where it's going to encompass and just block it out. So you don't need a lot of topology initially to block out, larger shapes and start planning things out. I'll do the same thing here. Hold down control, I'll split this, split that, and I'll go in here and just approximate this volume with this polygon. Draw some verts here, again blocking this structure out. Hold down shift, creating that polygon between those verts. Same thing here. And then I'm placing the stop right here at the origin point of that structure. Same thing here. And sometimes when you're really light on polygons like this, you might have to finagle the camera a little bit. You see how if you're here, it might snap off into space. So the lighter you are, sometimes it will cause issues, but there's definitely ways you can work around it. If it's jumping around a lot, maybe just doing tab and extruding and then just positioning the verts. Sometimes that works well, especially in that first pass when you're light on topology. All right, so this looks pretty good, this bottom jaw. And let's start working the top here. So for each of these structures, I'm just drawing a big polygon. So I'm going to work in the corner of this nose right here and just draw my 4 verts, hold down shift and connect. And really what I try to do is whenever there's a sharp break in the geometry, so like here or in the shape, that's when I really need a additional vert, right? So that's kind of one of the guidelines or what I think about when, finding that balance of keeping things relatively low, but, obviously having enough to properly describe the shape in that initial phase. So I'm working my way around the corner. And what I try to do as much as humanly possible is, keep things pretty even on the top and bottom of the radials. I'll go ahead and move on to the brow. And one thing that I'll do is I'll bring back my edge flow guide here. One thing you'll notice on this guy, right, and this is a pretty standard or common pattern for the brow. This is not really going to work for us, right? So we do have a brow here, but it does wrap around and kind of shoot through to the other side of the nose, right? The problem with our character is that this area, it's going to get very dense, right? Between the jaw and just this lower eyelid. So we're going to need a very thick part here, and then we're going to have to route that geometry into a small space. So that's not really going to work. So in this case, we're going to have pretty much this flow here, but we'll have to improvise. So either this is going to shoot through to the bottom here, or maybe we'll just wrap it around. So let's go ahead and start here, and I can hide this guy for the time being. So let's go ahead and start creating the brow here. So I'll go ahead and draw one big polygon. and I'll connect holding down shift. And if things just don't snap right, I don't waste too much time. I'll just do the extrude instead, and I'll extrude all the way out here. And looks like that got snapped. So you want to be careful because automatically it is going to try to snap to verts. So just make sure you're pulling, giving yourself enough space. And I am mindful of spacing, right? I know at some point these are going to have to connect, but I'm not worried about that right now. But I definitely want to have, some uniformity when creating this. And I can bring this guy down because we see that this shape starts to taper this way. So we could definitely start tapering our edge flow a little bit. And then I'll work this way. And definitely got to split these up. So I think this looks pretty good. I'll add one here. So anytime I see stuff like this where, we definitely have like this really sunken in, I usually try to just add, one in the middle. And now we start to push out just a little bit more. So, and we're still lining up with this. So I like the placement of that loop. All right, so what I'll do here is start going out this way and just kind of block in the top area of this brow. So what I can do here is start going this way. Right, this is the flow that it's giving me. One thing I will do before I do that is bring this down and just shoot across. So that's going to block this in that way. And this is going to have kind of a corner here. So let's approximate that. So I'm going to draw a polygon here, and then we could draw one here. And now we kind of have this redirect going on this way, right? With this corner. So what I can do at this point is hold down Tab, middle mouse click, and just extrude this edge like so. Hold down Control. It's going to go ahead and drop a edge loop here. And now it's just a matter of sliding these verts to approximate the shape. Sometimes what you can do is instead of working with these two edges, you can delete one. You just have less topology to add, and then you could just do a little bit of edge flow work there at the corner. I think that's what I'm going to do. So I like how that's looking, and we can go back to the multi-cut here. You see if I switch here, it'll actually get off my quad draw, but if I stay in quad draw, I do Control right click and go to the multi-cut. Doesn't mess up our visibility. So that's kind of a nice thing. So I can just add that edge loop there, hold down Control, middle mouse click, and now just go back to quad draw, and we can do our little bit of edge flow work here that we kind of had previously. So I'm going to leave the brow alone. I think it's at a good spot. So the next order of business is to basically finish out this front part of the head, or really what I call the mask. This is really where most of the edge flow is actually on a character, and then the back of the head is kind of more bland. So what I'll do for this, and one thing you'll notice if you do the Tab middle mouse click, you'll get, especially on quad draw, everything's trying to snap. So that's not really optimal. So what I like to do sometimes is break up the edge loop, but just extruding one edge. And now I'm going to be able to extrude this in one direction and this in one direction, right? So probably from this point, I'll do Tab middle mouse, and you see this polygon kind of broke up the edge flow. So it's going to kind of act as a stopper. So I'm going to bring this all the way down like this as much as possible, and then play around with the verts. That way we're actually snapping. So one thing that I probably need to do at this juncture is add an edge loop, because the volume here is really bad. So before I do that, I'm going to start just thinking about this corner here. So using this extra topology, and I'm going to start spreading this out as much as I can, right? Because we're coming from these points here. So we don't want stuff like this, towards this area. So we definitely want to spread out this topology, but I think we can put it to good use. Same thing here. We'll spread this out this way. and this way as well. I'll just go ahead and add an edge loop right about here, right in the middle. We definitely need that volume. One thing that I like to look for edge flow, unless my shape really demands it, I don't like things like this, right? Like very spiky. So especially when I'm starting to do my first pass, I just want a smooth flow, right? So I want to think about this as a line, and a smooth line is that, unless my shape underneath, like I said, requires it. So that's kind of what I'm looking for when pretty much just drawing these edges. I think that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and kind of block this area out. Let's start filling this in, and we're also going to take care of the nose. So I think I'll start with the nose first in this case. So I'll go ahead and just start drawing polygons. And you can see, like, sometimes the shapes are actually pretty easy to see. Like we see that this probably just could be knocked out with a single poly there. And I think a lot of this has to do with the sculpting, right? So if you use like the polish brushes or the trim dynamic in ZBrush, sometimes that can help create planes on your blockouts. But in turn, a lot of times it's kind of easier to see those shapes versus, if your sculpt is very, very muddy. So obviously I try to remain light here, but with noses, smaller areas like that, ears, they are going to require some more denser edge flow right off the back. What we could do here is go this way, like this, and we are coming here towards where it just kind of tapers down a little bit. So I don't mind doing something like this and finishing it out like that, right? And we'll butt this one here. So I'll start filling some of this in here, and some of this is going to be pretty easy because I was mindful. Some of this I will have to add some divisions, which I really don't mind, especially here. So just holding down shift, I'm just connecting this. And like I said, if you're mindful about what you're doing and always kind of have that connection in the back of your mind, then filling these gaps won't be so tedious, since most things will line up. So I finished blocking in the front part of the mask here. What I'll do from here is finish out blocking the forehead, rounding out the corner here, and really just start blocking in some of the ears as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hold down tab and then middle mouse click, and I'll overshoot it right about here. Same thing with this. And then I'll pretty much work with extremes and start filling this up. One thing you can do is start reducing this if you need to. Usually here you'll see, depending if your character has hair or not, but a lot of wireframes you'll notice that some polygon reduction or rounding towards the center will happen just to reduce some of the topology going to the less dense part of the back of the head. And this is a reduction pattern that you can use. You see that if you route it towards the center line, you're basically creating a corner, and this edge no longer extends that way. So that is a pattern that you can use. So one thing that I'll do is I want to preserve this line right here for the skull. So I'll start bringing this down, and then from here I could probably want to use one of these edges and pretty much continue. So I'm just kind of working on the spacing right now. I think I'm going to start tapering then this way. So from here I can just take this and hold down tab and just extrude this guy out like this. Kind of block that out. I'll go ahead and close this gap here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just start rounding this. Now, one thing that I do want to keep in mind is that this is going to have to get a lot more dense. So, you know, what do I want to do with this edge flow ultimately? If I leave it like this, it's going to end up flowing here. And I don't know if I want that, because you definitely see that we need it here, but we don't need it here. So maybe we can go ahead and start kind of routing it back this way and more towards the center line. So what I'll need to do is figure out where the corner of this shape needs to be. It looks like right about here where those wrinkles come in. So what I'll do is I'll bump these guys down, right? And from here, we can start creating a little bit of edge flow with the multi-cut tool, right? So I'll go ahead and do Control-Shift right-click. We'll go to the multi-cut. And we could actually create one of these corners here, right? So what I can do is here, and I'll just cut this way. Now we're pretty much getting 2 loops for the price of none, meaning these are kind of flowing back this way, but none of them are flowing back this way, right? So now I can go ahead and add one here and add one here. And you see that ultimately, we're not going to be super dense here, which is kind of what we want. So I don't mind this. Maybe I'll end up doing another one right here, but for the time being, I'm content with this. Maybe just me spacing this out. So I'm happy how that looks. Let's go ahead and just add a couple divisions here. So I'll add one in the middle. Maybe what I could do at this point too is that since we're still on the first pass, let's actually reduce some of this. And I'm going to delete this one as well. And I'll just add this one here and this one here. So I'm going to show you a quick method of using a primitive to actually insert here for the back of the head. And this is a nice technique because a lot of times, you know, drawing this or extruding can get a little bit tedious. And this method works good for the back of the head. Also works really good for limbs if you actually use a cylinder instead of a box. But what I'm going to do here is create a cube. And I have that hotkeyed, so I'm just going to bring up my cube here. And I'll frame on this. And what I'll do at this point is just scale. So I'm basically want to block in the back of the head here with this cube, give or take. Now, you might start noticing some lag. That's because QuadDraw, if we look at the history here, and we actually just bring up the channel box, see that for every move that you do, it's going to actually store that in the history. This long history stat could actually lag your system. So what you could do, a quick fix here, is go to Edit, Delete by Type, and you could just freeze the history, and now you deleted that history stack. So that should help out your performance a little bit. Obviously, the resolution of this mesh is also important. So, try to dynamesh it if you can, or just reduce the poly count before bringing it into Maya. So what I'm going to do here is just scale it to encompass the whole volume of the back of the head. So let's go to mesh here and go to smooth. And we're going to give this a level 2. Let's see what a 3 looks like. 3 is a little too dense. So let's just give it a 2. You see that just starting with this cube, we get these nice poles. They kind of match with the corners of the back of the head. So from here, we don't need the whole thing. We only need just pretty much this part. So we'll go ahead and delete this. And I'm just selecting the edges here. And you see that we pretty much blocked this out with the edges. So I'm going to go ahead and detach this. And just double click this here. Shift I to inverse the selection. And not sure why it's snapping to this. Let's delete the history. And now, if we go back here, this should be good to go. There we go. So that was kind of odd. And I'll double click this island here. So detach will let you, once you detach the components, you will be able to basically just double click those polygon islands to just quickly gut areas out. And I need to do the same thing. The main trick to this is that, it doesn't penetrate the volume. So I think this looks pretty good. Make sure that you're in component mode. On object mode, this won't work. But now, since live surface is on, and we just go into our verts and just snap in here, you see that this is going to snap, right? It's kind of hard to see now because just of the shaded mode. But what we can do, the cool thing about this, is that we could take this mesh, we could take this mesh, and we could just combine it. We can go back to quadra. And now, ultimately, we kind of use the primitive to, basically get deformed onto this head and just kind of help us fill in some of these gaps, right? So this is definitely an option. I mean, obviously, you could have extruded and kind of did the same thing that we did here, but this is just another workflow and really works well with arms if you start with a cylinder. So what I'll do here is take this guy and detach it as well. Double click this and delete it. Go back to quadra. So from here, I'll go ahead and just finish connecting this and start creating the edge flow for the ear. So I'm just speeding up the video here and connecting the head to the back of the head. Doing one more rerouting towards the center of the head. And I'm actually removing some edge loops within the first pass. I am doing a radial to block off the ear as well. And I'm going to start blocking out the sternocleidomastoid. Basically, it's the neck muscles that start at the clavicle and run towards the back of the ear. Here, I'm just dropping in the initial radials for the ear and then the inner radial. So just like the eye and the brow, I'm doing these radial loops, filling them in later. For the back of the ear, what I'm actually going to do is I'm not going to try to attempt it since it was pretty muddy and not well defined. I'm actually going to model this part more like traditionally modeling with live surfaces turned off. So I'm looking to finish out the first pass here by blocking in the back of the neck and also the front of the neck. So for this part, I'm just going to speed it up again. I'm just going to pull this down. I will probably do some edge flow work here. You do notice that, if we were to extrude all the way down here, this is pretty much going to be routed if we just pull everything down towards this V right here. So that's probably not what we want. So I will do some edge flow work to route this probably this way. That way we don't have pretty much just the traffic jam of edge loops here. So let's start the second pass. The second pass should move a little bit quicker since most of this is already blocked in, and we really don't have that much edge flow work except for the base of the teeth here. So what I'm going to do is basically add another edge loop here. And looks like we need it anyway, so I'll go ahead and add it right about here. That looks good. Just add a little bit more resolution. And then from here, looks like we need to start thinking about this structure right here, right? So what I'll do is kind of move this. We could probably add another edge loop here. And now we can start blocking out this, the top of this, right? What we're essentially going to need is some radial edge flow, right? And there's a couple of ways, but just blocking this to a polygon is definitely going to help, right? So we could extrude, or we could just use the multi-cut. Either or, that's going to basically do the same thing. I think for this, I'm just going to use the multi-cut tool here, and I'll cut this way like this. And I'll cut this way, and I'll cut this way as well. One thing that we probably could do instead of leaving this one out is actually just do this. And now we can go back to quad draw, give this a little bit more breathing room, push it back just enough. So we're clearing the tooth here. And at some point, just like I said, like the back of the ear, we're going to have to build a mouth cavity. And that's going to be done with the live surface and the quad draw turned off. But for now, I'm just going to push this as much as it'll let me. And you see that now we have a nice little radial flow to this. One thing that we'll need on the surface is another division here. So one thing that you probably want to check before you start your second pass is kind of how things are flowing. I already checked mine, so I think I'm fine. But, you know, just definitely make sure that when you're adding loops to areas that need it, they're kind of flowing the way that you want them to, all right? So I'll go ahead and add a loop here right in the middle. So I'll do control and then middle mouse click. That looks pretty nice. I can add another one here, and that's going to help to round this out. And then I can go back in here and do the same thing, right? So with more divisions here, we can take that and further shape this. And depending on how close you are going to get to this creature, to this head here, you know, this loop is going to be in handy because once we get done modeling, we could actually push down. So you'll be able to see some of that separation between the actual gum line and the beginning of the tooth. And I'm just making sure that this edge flow matches with the underlying structure. I think what I'm going to do here, since we're going to need more resolution flowing this way, I'm going to actually do a reroute here. So I'm going to reroute this back. We're probably going to have to fix these poles so it flows this way, but I'm going to go to the multi-cut again. And same thing that we did at the brow. I think this is going to be beneficial. So we'll cut this way. And we'll cut this way. And we'll probably just merge these verts like this. And that's going to, should fix that up. So we'll go back to quad draw here and then just snap these guys like this, right? And now we should be able to just drop a loop here, go back to multi-cut, and make that connection. So we could probably add one here just to restore some volume. So you pretty much see how I did this one, and I'm going to repeat the pattern for all these bone structures. Finished creating the structures for the bottom of the teeth here, And you can see that they're all pretty similar, just this radial here, and then this rerouting pattern towards the base. So I completed that. The next order of business is going to be basically evening out some of these larger spans. So we're going to add more resolution around here. After that, we'll turn off quad draw and we'll extrude and create a mouth cavity. We'll go ahead and get the inside of the eyes created, fill this up, and then we'll create the back of the ear here. Sometimes when you have quad draw enabled and you're trying to extrude in, it makes it very, very hard. I'll speed the video up and add more resolution throughout the mesh. I'm adding more resolution here and just trying to balance out all sides. And this is kind of what I said about, the second pass just builds out quicker because most of the edge flow is already established. So in a lot of parts, the second pass is just adding more geometry, right? Or just adding more edge loops. Here, I'm just closing out the inner part of the ear and I'm just extruding out thickness with quad draw turned off. For the mouth cavity, what I noticed works better, instead of just doing a normal extrude where you control the thickness, you just do the extrude and then you enter edit pivot mode. You move that pivot to the middle of the mouth cavity and just scale inward. Because sometimes when you just are doing the thickness slider, it gets kind of wonky. And, if you have a bunch of faces or edges facing different directions, you don't get a clean direction with that extrude. So that's a little bit workaround if that mouth cavity doesn't build out right. This part, I'm just building out the back of the ear, again, with quad draw and live surfaces turned off. And I'm just modeling and, cleaning things up and make sure that the ear connects. Also keep in mind, any changes that you do with quad draw turned off, they won't snap to the live surface. So what I'm doing is areas that I actually added edge loop or just did adding really any geometry, I'm just basically moving it with quad draw back on and it'll snap to the underlying surface. I just selected the center line of the model and I just scaled it towards the X, and that's going to just flatten that out and getting things ready for symmetry. I'm looking at my mesh with quad draw and the actual sculpted decimated mesh turned off. One thing that I'm looking at is I could probably use a little bit more resolution here compared to the teeth. So what I'll do is just turn back the head back on, turn live, and then turn this guy, go back to quad draw here, and I'll probably just add a couple more edge loops here to just push out that volume so that doesn't look too bad. And I'll do the same thing here and just make sure that this resolution just matches well. I think it does for this one. And then the last thing too is that I'll make sure that this line or this loop really just hugs the teeth well, right? Because we're about to push this guy in. So I think we really need to get a clean perimeter here. So I'm just going around, just making those last little bit of changes. Push this guy like this. You see in the back, and obviously it's a little bit hard to see, but I think we could just push all these back. So it looks pretty good, and now I'm just going to take this quad draw off, and I'll just isolate this. Go to face mode, hold down tab, paint these guys, and then just extrude. And I'll just extrude in something like this. And what I could do with this edge is select it, and we can do a small little bevel, something like that. Bring my teeth back, select my live mesh here or my sculpt and hide it. So now we can see the effect of just having that radial and that extrusion, and if we get close to our character, and this is not ridiculously dense, but it really just helps, sell that illusion that these are two different structures. And, that's anytime that you have geometry wrapping around something else, that's really when you get that connection, or really that illusion that these are separate pieces and they're both fitting together. After finishing all the holes for the teeth, I went through my model and did a final round of cleanup. I cleaned up the nostrils, make sure everything was quadded, and for here I decided to do another reroute, so I would reduce the number of edges going into the mouth corner. The final part of this, which is very important, is just getting everything ready for symmetry. So doing final bits of cleanup and also selecting all the border vertices and make sure that they are flattened out in the X scale. That way you can get a clean symmetry of your model. If I bring back the edge flow guide that I brought up in the beginning, we'll see that a lot of the similarities here, even though this is very different proportions, we have the same loops right here for the eye, right? So we have the same radial loops for the eye, similar loops for the brow. We just had to make some adjustments here. Similar setup for the neck muscles here. And then we also have that same radial sectioning off the ears as well, right? So ladies and gentlemen, this is the final retopology of the model. Thank you so much for tuning in to this Maya Retopology tutorial for beginners and expanding your knowledge on character creation and your own workflow. Like always, please consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of the video, and please consider sharing this video with another 3D artist that might find value in the information. Until we meet again, folks, I will catch you next time.